wind coming off the San Francisco peaks was a living thing by late afternoon, a phantom with teeth. It scraped across the high desert, dragging a cold that cut through my buffalo hide coat and sank deep into the bones. My cabin sat alone on this stretch of northern Arizona territory, a stubborn little island in a sea of brown brush and frost-bitten rock. It was a dry, quiet place far enough from the nearest town that the only voices I heard for weeks at a time were the creaks of the floorboards and the whispers of the wind. I liked it that way. I'd always liked it that way. Solitude was a balm and necessary quiet after the roar of a life that had taken everything. I was 32 years old, tall and strong, but it was the kind of strength that came from hauling timber, digging fence posts, and breaking frozen ground year after year. It was a strength born of necessity, not pride. My beard was trimmed short more out of a habit I couldn't shake than from any sense of vanity, and my hair hung shaggy around my ears. My work shirt and trousers were worn at the elbows and knees, the original color, long ago leached from them by dust and time. I didn't own much anymore. A single bed, a hearth that burned unevenly, a rifle. I kept leaned in the corner in a chair by the window where I'd sit for hours watching storms roll in like freight wagons. I'd lived with a ghost in this cabin for 5 years. The ghost of my brother Samuel, who had died in a Union trench near Chattanooga. I'd buried him in my mind, a fresh grave every day. And the ghost of my wife Annabelle, who had died 2 winters after that. Her lungs had filled with fever and she'd drowned in her own body in the span of a week. The memory of her labored breathing still came to me at night, a wet rattling sound that would startle me awake. I'd buried her under the only shade tree near the barn where she used to sit and watch me work. I never put up a marker. Didn't see the need. Her grave was marked on my heart, and that was all that mattered. Since then, my life had become a predictable loop of tasks. I mended tools, fed livestock, hauled water, chopped wood. I did what needed doing and nothing more. The world had already taken its best shot at me, and I'd learned how to keep breathing in the wreckage. That evening, as the wind turned mean and the sky bled from gray to a sullen ash, I stood by the stove. I stirred beans and salt pork in an iron pot, the steam rolling off in a fragrant cloud. My fingers were stiff from the cold, even near the flame. I wasn't hungry, not truly, but I always cooked. It was a routine. And routine was the last thing I had left. And then it came. A knock. 3 soft raps against the door. A pause. Then 3 more. I froze. The spoon clattered against the pot's side. Nobody came this far. Not unless they were lost, desperate, or looking for something to steal. The last thing I had was my life, and I had a feeling the world was done trying to take it. I put the spoon down slowly. My heart, a thing I thought had gone quiet years ago, hammered against my ribs. It wasn't fear. It was caution. I stepped to the door, my right hand resting near the latch, my left not far from the rifle leaning against the wall. I didn't draw it. Not yet. I pulled the door open just enough to see. A woman stood there. She was young, in her mid-20s maybe, but her eyes looked older than the mountains behind her. Her dark brown hair was tangled and half plastered to her face with cold sweat. Her skin was pale and her lips were cracked and dry, the corners of her mouth raw. Her dress had once been a respectable prairie-style beige with a faded floral pattern, but it was torn at the hem and split up one thigh. The bodice was loose and the neckline was ripped and low, revealing dirt-smudged skin and red marks along the swell of her chest like from fingers or a rope. She wasn't bleeding, but she wasn't whole either. One foot was bare. The other wore a mismatched moccasin, the sole half torn away. Her arms were crossed over her chest, not modestly but defensively. Her whole body shook with a tremor that was part cold, part raw terror. I said nothing. She didn't beg, didn't cry. She just looked down, then back up at me with a pained effort, as if eye contact was a wound she had to reopen. I can cook, she whispered, her voice a thin, dry rasp. I can clean. I can be quiet. That last part, I can be quiet, wasn't said like a promise. It was said like a condition. A survival tactic she'd been forced to learn. My eyes moved from the desperate plea in her eyes to the tension in her shoulders, the fresh bruises on her arms. Her weight was already shifting from foot to foot, ready to bolt even now. She was terrified. She didn't say who she was or where she came from. And I didn't ask. I simply stepped back and left the door open. She entered slow, like someone unsure if it was a trick. The warmth of the fire hit her face and she winced as if it hurt. She didn't look around. Didn't marvel at the shelter. She just walked over to the stove and stood near it, holding her arms close her knees, nearly giving out. Her breathing was a broken, uneven thing. I shut the door and bolted it. The sound made her flinch and she tried to hide it, but I saw it all the same. I didn't approach her. I just turned and ladled a second helping of beans into a clean tin bowl, placed it on the table, and pulled out the other chair. She didn't move. I sat down and ate a few spoonfuls, watching her from the corner of my eye. Finally, she stepped toward the table. Her legs moved like they weren't sure what solid ground felt like anymore. She sat down without a word, picked up a spoon, and ate small bites, slow and quiet. She didn't touch the bread until I did. Every move she made was measured, like she expected punishment if she made the wrong one. I didn't talk. Neither did she. But I noticed things. The way she gripped the spoon too tight. The way her eyes darted to the window every time the wind blew hard. The way she only chewed with her back teeth as if her jaw still hurt. After about 10 minutes, she finally spoke. "Charlotte," she said quietly, like it had been a long time since anyone had used her name. I gave a short nod. "Jedediah." We ate the rest of the meal in silence. When we were finished, she rose. She took both bowls, rinsed them with water from the barrel by the door, and wiped them dry. I hadn't asked her to. She just did. Then she found a blanket from the hearth and curled up near the wall. Not on the bed, not on the cot, but on the floor. Her back was to the wall. Her face toward the room, the blanket wrapped around her like a shield. I watched her for a long moment. She was already asleep by the time I rose from the chair. I didn't speak. I just moved to the back, removed my coat, and laid down on the bed without bothering to undress. As I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts turned slow and heavy. I didn't know who had hurt her. I didn't need to. I could see it in her posture, in her silence, in the way she kept herself small. And I knew one thing with certainty: she had no place to go. For now she was under my roof. And that meant something. Morning came without color. The frost had crept up the inside of the cabin's windows, leaving pale, jagged veins across the glass like a warning of what waited outside. The fire had burned low in the night, and the cold inside was sharp enough to bite. I sat up slowly, my back aching from another night on the bed that was 2 feet too short, but I didn't stretch. I just swung my legs over the edge and reached for my shirt. The cabin was still. No sound from the floor. I looked toward the hearth. She was still there. Charlotte hadn't moved much. The blanket had slipped off one shoulder, exposing the skin beneath her torn dress. Her arms were drawn tight to her chest, legs curled toward her body like she'd learned not to take up space. Her hair had fallen across her cheek, and there was a faint line of dried dirt along the curve of her jaw. I stood and stepped quietly across the floor, kneeling near the hearth. I added kindling and 2 thick logs, coaxing the flame back to life. The sound of it crackling stirred her. She flinched awake, not gently, not slowly. Her eyes opened wide like she expected a blow, and her whole body tensed. She looked at me, alert, her breath short, then saw the fire. Saw me crouch beside it, not over her. Not close, just working. I didn't speak. I just nodded once, then turned back to the flames. It took her a long moment, but I saw her shoulders lower. She breathed out through cracked lips. She sat up slowly, the blanket clutched to her chest. I stood and stepped to the water barrel, filling a tin cup. I crossed the cabin and offered it to her. She took it with both hands, sipped, winced, then drank the rest. I went back to the stove and began slicing salt pork. She watched me now, more awake, her eyes clearer than the night before, but her expression stayed guarded. I set a pan over the flame and added the meat. The smell filled the small room. I cracked 2 eggs into the pan, then 2 more. She hadn't asked for food, but she didn't look away from the pan. I placed 2 plates on the table. "Sit." She hesitated, then rose. The blanket slipped, revealing the deep tear across her dress's neckline again. I didn't react. I just looked down at my plate. Charlotte noticed. She pulled the blanket back up and sat across from me. We ate in silence, but this time the silence wasn't thick with fear. It was just quiet. Halfway through the meal, her voice came soft. "Your place," she said. "It's far from town." I nodded once. 12 miles west of the road. She chewed, swallowed. "You live alone?" "Yeah." Another pause. 5 years. She nodded. "Good." Then looked away. That was all she said for a while. I stood when the meal was finished and started washing the plates. She rose and helped me. We didn't speak. After she turned toward the hearth and folded the blanket, placing it on the chair. "Where do you want me?" she asked. Not like someone looking for a place to rest, but like someone who expected to be told where to scrub. I looked at her. The bruises along her arms, the way she stood stiffly with her hands together in front of her thighs like she was waiting for a command. I scratched my beard. "You need rest. You're not here to work." Her jaw tightened slightly. I wasn't trying to be a burden. "You're not." She blinked at that. It didn't seem to register. Then she stepped past me and began sweeping the floor anyway. Not frantically, just with a quiet, focused energy. I let her. Outside, the wind had held low and snow flurries had started. I opened the door and stared out at the sky. No sun, just clouds like lead and a thin edge of white covering the edges of the barn. I turned back inside. Charlotte had taken a rag to the counter now. She wiped in slow circles. Her expression had gone blank, but her movements were precise. I watched her for a moment, and the question one I hadn't dared to ask slipped out. "Where do you come from?" I asked. Not demanding, just calm. She stopped wiping, then set the cloth down. "South," she said. "Around Prescott. Had people there. My stepbrothers." She paused. "They sold me. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to." The answer was already written in the bruises on her arms and the rip across her dress. Charlotte sat down on the edge of the chair. "A man took me for a mule and a saddle. Said I could cook. Said I was quiet." Her voice dropped lower. Didn't stay quiet enough, I guess. My jaw set. I didn't move. Charlotte looked up at me. "I didn't kill him, if that's what you're wondering." I shook my head once. I wasn't. That made her pause again. Something shifted in her face, like a tension dropping from the back of her neck. Not trust, not yet. But something just past survival. I reached for my coat. "Got livestock to check," I said. "Storm's coming." She stood. "I'll come." I studied her. "You can't work in that dress," I said plainly. She looked down at herself, her legs exposed, her chest half showing through the torn bodice. She straightened. "Then show me where the needle is." I hesitated, then turned to the small wooden box near the shelf. I opened it and handed her thread, and an old needle wrapped in muslin. "You can sew." Charlotte gave a faint nod. "Learned young. It was expected." I stepped out into the wind. As I closed the door behind me, I glanced back once. She was seated again, already threading the needle. Her head bowed and her hands steady despite the bruises. Out in the yard, snow was beginning to stick. The storm was coming in heavy. I pulled up my collar, adjusted my hat, and started toward the barn. She hadn't asked to stay. She'd just come in. But I was beginning to think maybe, just maybe, I didn't mind. By mid-morning, the storm was full over the foothills. Snow came fast and heavy, covering the ground in a thick coat that muffled everything. My steps, my breath, the sound of the distant wind between the trees. I worked in silence, pulling hay into the troughs, brushing snow off the backs of the 2 remaining mules, and checking the latches on the barn doors twice over. The animals didn't seem bothered. They'd been through worse. As I finished tying down the final hinge against the wind, my thoughts drifted back to the cabin. To her. I hadn't meant to let her in, not at first. But there had been something about the way she didn't ask, just offered. The way she'd stood there shaking and silent, with the kind of eyes that didn't expect kindness anymore. That kind of woman either died on the trail or became someone else. Something about her. She hadn't died yet. I stepped back into the cabin around noon, stomping snow from my boots. The warmth inside hit my face first. The fire was going strong again, and the smell of food, actual food, reached me before I even took off my coat. Charlotte was at the stove, her sleeves rolled up over her forearms, a coarse patch stitched across the thigh of her dress. The neckline was still low and frayed, but she'd sewn it tighter at the chest, enough to hold. Still, the shape of her body, soft, curvy, full, was visible beneath the fabric. She didn't hide it, but she didn't flaunt it either. She moved with intention, not performance. I watched her for a moment before stepping fully inside. She turned, holding a pan. "I found some cornmeal. Hope you don't mind." I shook my head. "I boiled beans too. Salted them. Didn't know if you liked it heavy." I took a seat. "Don't matter." She brought the plate over and sat across from me. There was cornbread, beans, and even a bit of molasses from a jar I hadn't opened in over a year. She'd found it on her own. "You always keep this place this clean?" she asked between bites. "I clean enough to keep the mice away," I said. "Not like this." She gave a tight nod. "It helps me doing things." I didn't respond, but I understood. Some folks drank. Some went numb. Some just stayed busy so the quiet didn't swallow them up. We ate in silence. This time it felt easier. The air wasn't so tense. When we finished, she gathered the plates again and went about rinsing them like it was already routine. I stood and checked the stove. "You warm enough?" I asked. "I'm fine." I looked at her face, flushed now from the fire, but less pale than the day before. Her lips no longer cracked. The bruises on her arms looked darker today, the blood rising near the surface, but she moved with less stiffness. "You rest at all?" I asked. "A little," she said, drying a plate. "Slept with my eyes open, I think." She paused, the cloth still in her hand. "I don't sleep real deep anymore." I gave a short nod. I understood that. She sat back down slowly, smoothing the skirt over her thighs. You were in the war, she asked, watching my limp as I moved back toward the hearth. I didn't answer right away. Yeah, I said. Which side? Union. She didn't flinch at the answer. You lose someone, she asked softly. I sat in the chair by the fire. Brother. She waited a moment before saying I lost my mother young. My father too. Stepbrothers after that. They made things worse. I looked into the fire. You running from them, she nodded. I told them I wouldn't lay with a man for trade. That I'd cook clean work. They didn't care. She didn't cry when she said it. Her voice was steady, even flat. I rubbed my hands together. You got somewhere you plan on going? No, she said plainly. Not anymore. She looked at me carefully. I'm not asking to stay forever. Just not to be pushed out. Not yet. I didn't speak for a long time. The fire popped between us. Then I stood cross to the corner and brought back a heavy buffalo hide blanket. I handed it to her without a word. She didn't thank me. She just took it, unfolding it across her lap. That afternoon we worked together. Charlotte scrubbed out the hearth and soaked an old iron kettle. I brought in more wood and repaired the hinge on the back door. She stitched the lining of my coat without asking. I noticed but didn't mention it. At one point, as the sun began to fade behind thick snow clouds, I caught her staring out the window. Her hand was braced on the sill, her face unreadable. I came up beside her. Something out there. She shook her head. I was just thinking, if they come looking for me. You won't hand me back, will you? I didn't answer right away. I looked out too, over the white field, the still barn, the distant ridge. No one comes this far, I said. And if they do, they'll answer to me. She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased just slightly. That night she laid near the fire again. But this time she was the one who pulled the blanket up tight, rested her head down, and closed her eyes without flinching. I watched her from the bed. She was still broken, still weary, but she was sleeping. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, the sun didn't show. Only a pale, colorless light filtered through the frost-caked windows. Snow had buried the path to the barn and piled against the door so high I had to shoulder it open. The air outside burned the lungs. Inside the cabin it was quiet but not tense. Something had shifted. I stepped back in shaking snow off my coat. Charlotte was at the stove, bare feet against the plank floor sleeves, pushed up stirring a pot. Her dress, still worn and patched, had been stitched again across the skirt. The neckline was still low and the curve of her full chest visible beneath it, but now sewn neater, held better. She moved with less stiffness. I watched her work. She'd found bacon ends in the bottom of a tin and was frying them with cornmeal. She looked up when she heard the door close but didn't speak. Just gave a nod and kept stirring. I removed my coat, hung it near the fire, and sat. She brought 2 plates and set them down. Steam rose off the food. I took a bite, chewed slow. You ever work on a ranch, I asked? Charlotte sat across from me. Number just kitchen, some back rooms. I always knew how to keep a place going, even when it wasn't mine. She said it without looking down. I understood the meaning. She'd been kept. Used. Not as a wife, not even as a worker, just as something owned. You're not kept here, I said. I know. She said it quick, like she needed to make sure I heard her before anything changed. We finished the meal in silence. Then, without being asked, Charlotte began cleaning. She moved slowly today, her body still bruised, healing, but her pace was steady. She washed, dried, swept, and straightened with practiced hands. I gathered my tools. The barn roof had started to sag under the weight of the snow. I needed to reinforce it. Before stepping out, I turned to her. You come outside, wear my coat. Charlotte glanced at it. It's too big. It's warm. I handed it over. She slipped it on. It swallowed her, the sleeves falling past her hands, but she didn't argue. Outside, the snow had softened. The wind had died down some, and the world looked blank and clean. We walked to the barn side by side. I started shoring up the beams. Charlotte stood off to the side, watching for a while. Then she fetched wood without asking, held the ladder steady while I climbed, and passed me nails and brace planks. We didn't speak, but something wordless passed between us. Usefulness. Trust. She didn't flinch when I climbed down near her. Didn't tense when I passed close. By late afternoon, the roof held again. Back inside, Charlotte moved slower. Her shoulders were tight. I brought over a basin of warm water and a cloth. You're sore. She nodded once. I didn't reach for her. I just set the basin beside her and stepped back. But she surprised me. Will you? She asked, her eyes on the fire. Just my shoulders. I can't reach. I didn't answer right away. Then I moved to her, slowly sat behind her. She let the coat slide off her shoulders. Her dress sagged low across her back, the neckline loose. Her skin was marked with deep red around the shoulder blades, blue bruising down one side. I dipped the cloth in the water and wrung it out with careful hands. When I pressed the warm rag against her skin, she exhaled like she hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. I cleaned in slow circular motions. Not hard, not soft, just enough. She didn't flinch. When I finished, I set the cloth down and pulled the coat back up over her shoulders. She turned. Her face was close to mine now. Hazel green eyes open and clear. No makeup, no pretense. There was silence, not nervousness, just a weight. Her hand came up and rested gently on mine. It was the first time she'd touched me. I didn't move. Her fingers stayed a moment, then slid away. She stood and walked to the hearth. I sat back in the chair, staring into the fire. I could still feel where her hand had been. That night she slept near the fire again, but turned to face me this time. Before closing her eyes, she whispered, "Thank you." I didn't answer out loud, but I didn't sleep for a long while. I listened to the wind die outside. I thought about her bruises. The scar across her collarbone I'd noticed but not touched. The fact that she'd let me help and the way her hand had rested on mine like it meant something. I hadn't asked her to stay, but she hadn't asked to leave either. The next few days passed without words needing to be said. Snow kept falling softer now, blanketing the hills and pressing silence into every inch of my land. The cold held, but the storm had passed. Inside the cabin, something quieter had begun to shift. Not in the weather, but between us. Charlotte had found a rhythm. She rose before me most mornings, bundled in my coat. Her hair still tangled, but her steps sure. She boiled water, lit the fire, and kept the cabin warm. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait to be told what to do. She simply moved through the space like she'd been part of it for longer than a week. I didn't mind. I found myself listening for her movements in the early dark. Her soft feet on the planks. The clatter of tin mugs. The sound of a spoon scraping against the bottom of a pot. I hadn't realized how much sound had meant to me until it came from her. That morning, Charlotte had pulled her mended dress tighter with a strip of torn cloth she'd sewn into a sash. Her bust still pushed visibly against the neckline, but now it looked more like something she'd chosen, not something taken. I caught glimpses, not with hunger, not yet, but with a slow awareness. I noticed the way her hips moved as she swept, how the torn slit up her skirt caught her thigh when she crouched near the fire. I didn't stare, but I noticed, and I felt guilty for it. She never caught me looking. Or maybe she did, but didn't say anything. We spent that morning mending the fence line behind the barn. The wind had knocked out 3 posts during the storm. I showed her how to hold the stake while I drove it in, and she didn't flinch when the hammer swung down close. She stood steady, her eyes on the post, her hands red from the cold but determined. "You done this before?" I asked, adjusting my grip. She looked at me. "Never. But it's not hard if someone shows you." I nodded once. "You're learning quick." Charlotte didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Later, while we ate by the fire boiled potatoes and venison from a salted slab I had stored in the cellar, she sat closer than she had before. Her knee brushed mine once lightly. She didn't move it away. After the meal, she cleaned. I stepped outside to stack wood. When I returned, she was brushing her hair by the hearth, long and dark, falling in waves down her back. The neckline of her dress had slipped again, baring the top of one full breast. Accidental or not, I didn't know, but she didn't cover it right away. I turned, gave her privacy. She didn't thank me, but she didn't pull away from me later either when I sat beside her with 2 mugs of warm water and we stared into the fire together. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like breathing. After a while, she set her mug down and shifted to face me. "I used to believe no man could touch me without wanting to own me," she said quietly. "But you haven't." I didn't look at her directly. My voice came low. "That's not why I let you in." "I know." She paused. "That's why I'm still here." She reached over and placed her hand on mine again like she had days before. But this time she didn't pull away. I turned my hand over beneath hers, letting our fingers rest, barely touching. Charlotte moved closer. She didn't say anything else, just leaned against me, her head resting near my shoulder, her breath warm through the linen of my shirt. I didn't move. I let her stay there. Minutes passed. Then she lifted her face slowly, her eyes on mine. I looked down at her, and for once I didn't pull away. Charlotte's lips were cracked but soft. When she leaned in, it wasn't hesitant. I met her halfway. The kiss was quiet, slow. There was no hunger in it, just truth. The warmth of her body against mine, the way her fingers curled into my shirt, the way my hands settled on the sides of her waist, careful not to press too hard. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. She didn't ask what it meant. I didn't offer to explain. She just rested her head against me again, and I let her stay like that until the fire burned low. That night she didn't sleep by the hearth. She stood beside the bed instead after I'd already laid down. "I'm not here to buy comfort," she said softly. "But I don't want to sleep alone." I didn't answer. I just moved over. Charlotte climbed in beside me. The mattress creaked beneath our combined weight. She curled into me, her back against my chest, and I draped the blanket over us both. I didn't touch her beyond that. She didn't ask me to, but I felt her breath steady, felt her hand find mine beneath the blanket, and that was enough. We didn't speak vows. We didn't call it anything, but something had changed. Not forced, not bargained, but chosen. The cabin was warm when I woke, warmer than it had been in months. The fire still glowed in the hearth, a faint orange light flickering across the log walls. Snow tapped at the windows in a quiet rhythm, but the wind had eased. For once the world outside felt distant. Charlotte lay curled against me beneath the blanket. Her back was pressed to my chest, her breathing deep and even. Her long hair trailed across the pillow and over my arm, and when she shifted slightly in her sleep, I tightened my arm around her waist without thinking. She didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. I lay still, unsure how long I stayed like that. Years, it felt like. I watched the way the fire danced shadows across the shape of her body. Her curves, the gentle rise of her hip beneath the blanket, the smooth skin of her shoulder where the dress had slipped down again in the night. But it wasn't lust in me. It was a slow ache and understanding. She had chosen to stay. When she stirred awake, her hand found mine beneath the blanket, her fingers curling into mine. She didn't look up right away, just rested there a moment longer. "I didn't think I'd sleep," she whispered finally. "You did," I said, my voice low, still rough from mourning. "I didn't wake once." I didn't say it, but I had. Not from discomfort. I'd spent most of the night listening to her breathe, reminding myself she was real. We rose together slowly. I lit the stove while she drew water. She'd found one of my old shirts days ago, a brown flannel worn soft by time, and now she slipped it on over her patched dress. It was far too big, but it covered her better. She still moved carefully, still flinched slightly when her shoulder pulled wrong, but her bruises were fading. While breakfast cooked, I sat by the window sharpening my knife. Charlotte sliced bread and stirred oats in a tin pot, humming under her breath. It was barely audible, but it was the first sound like that I'd heard from her. Not words, just a sound that wasn't survival. "Jedediah," she asked after a while, still facing the stove. "Yeah, if I wanted to stay, not just for the storm, would that be all right?" I looked up. "I already figured you had." She turned to me. I needed to hear it. I nodded once. "You're not in my way." That was as close to an invitation as I could give. She smiled faintly and turned back to the pot. We ate together. She didn't sit across from me anymore. She sat beside me, our shoulders brushing. And when I stood to wash the bowls, she came with me, drying them with a rag without being asked. Later that day, I hauled the wood pile closer to the door. The drifts had iced up overnight, and it took longer than usual. Charlotte came outside in my coat, holding the bucket, her hair tied back, now her cheeks red from the cold. We worked side by side, passing kindling and checking the animal shed. The roof still held. The mules began stomping at their stall, restless from being pinned in so long. I fed them by hand. Charlotte watched from the doorway, her arms folded, snow clinging to her moccasins. When we stepped back into the cabin, both dusted in white, Charlotte shut the door behind us and turned to face me. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "Not like this." I removed my coat and hung it on the hook. "You are," I said plainly. She walked toward me, her hands sliding along my shirt, resting at my chest. She looked up, her hazel green eyes wide but not afraid. "I want you," she said. "But not because I owe you." "You don't," I answered. "I know." She kissed me, then slow with intent. I kissed her back, my hands bracing her waist. I didn't rush, didn't take more than she gave. Her body pressed to mine, and I felt her warmth through the fabric, the curves of her hips against me, her chest rising against mine. When she pulled my shirt from my waistband, I let her. We moved together toward the bed. Clothes loosened, but not torn. Nothing forced. The blanket fell over us, hiding nothing but softening everything. It was slow. Her hand guided mine. My lips brushed her shoulder, her throat, her chest. And when I entered her, it was silent. No gasps, no cries, just closeness. Her arms wrapped around my neck and my head rested against hers. I moved carefully, reading every twitch of her fingers, every shift in her breath. After we lay tangled together, her leg across mine, my arm under her back. She didn't speak. Neither did I. We didn't need to. It wasn't about what had just happened. It was about the fact she hadn't left. that she'd come to my bed by her own steps, that she'd stayed. When Charlotte finally drifted off, I didn't follow her into sleep. I watched the snowfall return through the window crack, then looked down at the woman curled against me. I still didn't know everything she'd been through. She didn't know what I'd lost either. But that didn't matter now. We were here, and for the first time in 5 years I didn't feel alone. I woke before dawn like I always did. The fire had burned low again, leaving only coals that pulsed gently in the dark. The air inside the cabin was cold but not bitter. My arm was asleep under the weight of Charlotte's body. She was curled tightly against me, her breath soft, her hand resting over my ribs. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. Her warmth beside me was real. I still found myself checking, not out of doubt but disbelief. I hadn't planned on any of this. I didn't even know what this was yet, but I didn't want it to stop. Charlotte stirred slightly, then blinked her eyes open. She looked up at me groggy, her hair falling over her cheek. "Is it morning?" "Almost." She didn't move, just closed her eyes again and breathed. By the time the first light came through the window, I had already lit the stove. Charlotte sat up slowly, pulling the blanket to her chest, then stood and pulled on my oversized flannel shirt again. Her dress was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. We moved around the cabin like we'd been doing it for years, quiet, measured, without fuss. She fixed the morning pot of oats while I checked the door, cracked it open, and measured the snowpack. The storm was breaking. The sky beyond was clear for the first time in days, blue and sharp, clean across the ridgeline. As we ate, Charlotte seemed quieter than usual. Not withdrawn, just thoughtful. "You all right?" I asked. She nodded slowly, spoon in hand. "Just thinking." I didn't push. I didn't need to. After the meal, she helped me stack the last of the dry wood and brush snow off the roof's edge. Her hands were red from the cold, but she didn't complain. When we returned inside, she moved to the fire, rubbing warmth back into her fingers. She turned then. "Jedediah, can I ask you something?" I looked over from the window. "Yeah. Why haven't you gone back east?" I paused. It wasn't a question I'd expected. My brother died there. My wife died here. Going back didn't make sense. Charlotte studied me for a moment. "You loved her?" I nodded once. "Yeah." She didn't ask anything more about Annabelle. Didn't press about how she died or what it had done to me. I respected that. After a long pause, Charlotte sat beside me on the bench, folding her legs under her. She looked down at her lap. "I was thinking," she said. "If I stay, I mean really stay. I don't want to be a ghost in your house. I want to be useful. Part of it. You already are. I mean more than cooking. More than cleaning," she said. I looked at her confused. She hesitated. "If we fix up the other stall in the barn, we could raise chickens again. Maybe plant something come spring. I can sell things if you go into town. We could build something." I didn't answer right away. My eyes stayed on hers, watching her speak like she was waiting for me to take it away. "I got no one else," she said quietly. "And I'm not trying to steal from what you had before. I just want something real. Something mine." I rested my hand over hers. "You're not a guest," I said. "You're not passing through. Not unless you say so." She turned her hand under mine and held it. "I don't want to pass through." That afternoon, she unpacked the small cloth bundle she'd hidden beneath the bed. What little she'd carried when she first knocked on my door: a comb, a cracked mirror, a thimble, and a letter with no seal. She didn't let me read it. She just folded it again and tucked it deep into the drawer with her underthings. I repaired the cellar door. She mended one of my work shirts. I watched her stitch the way her fingers moved, calm, capable. That night, after we finished supper and sat watching the fire, I spoke. I was thinking about the fence line. South edge. I'll need help digging again once the snow melts. She looked over surprised. "You want me to help with that? You said you want to build something." Her smile was small, but it reached her eyes. Before we went to bed, Charlotte stood near the fire in nothing but my shirt. She turned toward me slowly. "I want you to touch me again," she said, "but only if you want to. Not because I owe it." I rose, stepped to her. "I don't take what's not offered." "I know," she whispered. This time she reached for me first. The days began to stretch longer. The sky held light past supper now, and when I stepped outside one morning, the snow had thinned enough to see brown earth beneath the drifts. Birds had returned. Not many, but enough to remind me the season was turning. Inside, Charlotte had changed too. She moved through the cabin with an ease I hadn't seen before, no longer careful in that haunted way. She laughed, sometimes low and short, usually at something I hadn't meant to be funny. She stood straighter. When she caught my eyes, she didn't look away. I had started clearing the south edge of the property, just like I'd said. The fence needed more than mending. It needed rebuilding. Charlotte joined me most mornings after breakfast wrapped in her shawl and boots that barely held together. I offered a ride to town for new ones. She nodded but said, "Not yet, I want to earn them." I didn't argue. One afternoon after hammering the last rail into place, I leaned on the post and looked at her. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not," she said. "I just like knowing this is mine too." I nodded once. That was enough. Back in the cabin that evening as she stirred a pot of stew, Charlotte moved slower than usual. I noticed the way she paused between steps like she was catching her breath. When she sat down to eat, she barely touched her bowl. I looked at her closely. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the fire. Her eyes were glassy. "You sick?" She shook her head, pressing her palm to her belly. "Just tired." She paused, a strange look in her eyes. "I don't think so," she said. I didn't push. Later that night, she leaned against the doorway watching me shave the edge of a new board for the barn. Her arms were folded over her chest, her face unreadable. "I'm late," she said. I stopped working, looked up at her. "For what?" She held my eyes. The kind of late that doesn't fix itself. I stayed still, the wood in my hands forgotten. Then I stood slowly, setting the tool down. "You sure?" "Number not yet. But it feels like it." I walked to her. Charlotte didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, waiting. "I don't expect anything from you," she said, quieter now. "If that's what you're thinking, I don't want you to feel trapped." I stepped closer. "You think I'd walk away from this? I've seen men do it. I'm not them." She looked up at me for a long moment and then she nodded. "I know." I rested a hand over hers. "Whatever it is," I said, "we handle it." That night she sat in my lap by the fire, curled against me in a way she hadn't before. Like she wasn't bracing for bad news. Like she wasn't waiting for things to fall apart. She kissed me slow, long, and held the back of my neck when I returned it. We made love again, not in desperation but with purpose. Her dress slipped down her shoulders, the shirt beneath falling open. She guided me with her hands, slow and steady. I moved carefully, holding her hips, my chest against hers. When I touched her stomach, she covered my hand with her own. Later, we lay together, her head on my chest, listening to the wind settle outside. "You ever think you'd have this again?" she asked. I shook my head. Didn't think I deserved it. "You do," she said it like a fact. "You be all right with a child here?" she asked after a while. I looked down at her. "You think I'd let you do it alone?" She closed her eyes. "Number not anymore." That was the moment it became real. Not just the baby, but the life forming around it. Spring came late that year, but it came sure. The snow melted in slow layers, leaving behind wet earth and a yard full of thawing fence posts. Birds nested in the rafters of the barn, and runoff from the ridge fed the dry creek that hadn't moved in nearly a year. I built a coop behind the shed with reclaimed wood. Charlotte planted potatoes in the softest patch of dirt near the cabin's south wall. The world had thawed, and so had we. Charlotte's belly grew round by the week. She didn't try to hide it. She wore my shirts open over her dress, the fabric stretched tight across her middle. Her walk had changed a little slower, a hand at her lower back sometimes, but she never asked for rest. I offered it anyway. She took it when she needed to. She'd been living with me for nearly 5 months now, and neither of us had ever spoken of marriage. One warm morning I woke to find her already gone from bed. I rose, pulled on my trousers and boots, and followed the smell of smoke to the barn. She was there, sweeping the stall where we planned to keep a goat later in the season. She paused when she saw me. I leaned against the door frame. "You're not supposed to be lifting." "I'm not. I'm pushing." She smiled. I stepped inside, my hands in my pockets. For a moment I just stood there watching her. Her hair was loose, her body fuller now, hips wide, chest heavier, her dress low. As always, the neckline still open and soft over her curves. She looked stronger now than the day I found her. Not just in body, something else. "I started carving something," I said. "Oh?" she asked, leaning the broom against the wall. I walked over to the far corner of the barn, pulled back a canvas cloth. There, under the light filtering in through the rafters, was a cradle, simple, solid, sanded, smooth, the shape rough but sure. Charlotte stood there staring at it, her lips parted. "You made this?" I nodded. "You didn't even ask me." "You didn't need to." She stepped closer, ran her hand over the edge of the cradle. Then she turned, her eyes glassy, but she wasn't crying. "You've never asked me to be yours," she said. "You've never said it." I looked at her for a long time. "I figured you'd already chosen," I said. Didn't think words would change it. She stepped in front of me, her hands resting on my chest, her head tilted just slightly. "I did choose you. I still am." "Then stay," I said, my voice low. "Stay as mine." She nodded once. "I already have." There was no ring, no church, no papers. but I pressed my forehead to hers, my hands on her stomach, and she whispered husband against my chest. I didn't correct her. That night, we shared the bed like always, but it felt different. I lay beside her, one hand on her stomach, the other tracing the curve of her arm. "I want her to have your eyes," Charlotte murmured. "Her?" I asked. Charlotte nodded. "I feel it. A girl. Strong, quiet like you, stubborn like me." I chuckled under my breath, then kissed her collarbone, letting my lips rest there. "When she's old enough," I said, "I'll show her how to build. You teach her how to stay." Charlotte looked up. "You think that's what we've done, stay?" I nodded. That's all it ever was. And it was true. No promises had been spoken, no debts owed. We had built our home from silence, routine, and choice. She had come to my door half frozen and whispering. I had opened it, and neither of us had left since. In the final days of spring, as birds gathered string for their nests, and the land turned green in places it hadn't before, I placed the cradle in the corner of the cabin. I didn't say a word. Charlotte saw it when she came in from hanging laundry. She stood there for a long while, just staring at it. Then she walked over, sat on the edge of the bed, and rested her hand over her belly. I came behind her, kissed the top of her head, and wrapped my arms around her. No vows, no preacher, no applause. Just two people quiet, holding on. And this time the door never closed again. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.